little buddy. Want a ride?
Pikachu!
Yeah, whatever. I'll be right back. Where can you catch all 150 Pokemon? On your Game Boy, that's where. Pokemon for Game Boy is here. With both packs, you can catch them all. Games and systems sold separately.
What is up out there in podcast land? And welcome back to the Pop Culture Basement Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Jamison, and I am excited tonight to have two guests with me from the History on Film podcast. We have Ross and Ryan. Guys, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're excited. It's always great to be invited to come on someone else's podcast instead of us doing the one begging for people to come on our show, which is being on the other side of the desk, as they say, is kind of nice.
I will say you are probably going to be the most learned people I have on this podcast.
Oh. You just set the bar to an expectation that I will never be able to meet. So that's great.
No, I mean
this is fun.
You've never met some of my friends and acquaintances. They're not going to be able to pole vault over this.
Now, full disclosure, we come from a part of the country where basements are just not a factor. So we know of them. We know their sort of mythic quality. But we do not have basements in the sun-scorched land that Ryan and I come from. So
right. To me, basements are kind of like Idaho. I don't think it exists because I've never met anyone from Idaho. I don't know anyone who's ever been there. So basements like birds in Idaho are not real. That's my official.
Well, I will agree with you. I don't know if Idaho is real also because I have never met anybody from Idaho. So I'm with you on that. Birds, I grew up being afraid of birds. So maybe they're not real because they were to me when I was growing up, they were some kind of mythic creature.
Well, you just said you're from Philly, so go birds.
Yeah. That's right. That's a different kind of bird. And that is a bird that can kill you.
That's called playing the room. So
usually if you're wearing Dallas or Giants colors.
Yeah. Speaking of Idaho, real quick, not only have I never met anyone from Idaho, I've lived all over the country, and I've seen tags from pretty much all 49 states. I've never seen an Idaho state tag. I've seen every other state.
Do they have cars in Idaho? They probably still have cars and buggies, right?
I don't know what they got that exists because
it
doesn't exist.
I would say I'm sorry to anybody listening from Idaho, but I mean, let's be honest. Of the tens of listeners I have, I don't think any of them are from Idaho. So.
But if they are, please.
Yes, if
please
they are,
email us. Yeah.
Email me. Don't email these guys.
Yeah. Send your postcards too. Yeah.
Exactly. Rate and review. Give me a 5-star review, and you can rip me and the podcast as long as you give a 5-star review. It's all good.
Well, if they find us on socials, they can send us a picture. But I want like a proof of life, like with a newspaper with like today's with the current date.
And I wanted to say I feel a little. I do feel bad that you guys never got to experience having a basement. When I named it Pop Culture Basement, but it's kind of everybody has their sort of basement. I had an actual basement growing up. I'm in my basement right now, again recording. But everybody has that room, that spot in their house where when they're growing up, they go to watch their movies, to play their games, to read their books, to discover the things that are gonna mold their outlook on life. So yes, I did have an actual. It's funny though, the basement I grew up in my childhood home was not underground. It was a basement. I was in a row home and we had 3 floors, so that was just the bottommost floor, but it was not under anything.
Well, so like where we come from in Florida, it's like you don't say like, oh, I'm going to go hang out at someone's house. It's like, oh, I'm going to go hang out at their property. And whether there's a structure on it or not, is sort of like dealer's choice. But the
Kind of
equivalent
like your dad's property, you know.
exactly. I think the closest equivalent though for me and Ryan was in high school. We put a ceiling fan in my garage at my mom's house, and that was because we would have LAN parties and everyone would bring their computers over. We'd set them up on big plastic tables and network them all together and play games all night, and we needed the fan and the garage door halfway open just to get the air moving through. So
I remember when your mom, because she had like a little patio and then the garage was detached. She finally screened in from the garage to the house, so it was like it kept everything cooler too. That was a game changer.
That was
when Donnie
a game
did
changer,
that.
yeah.
I was like, oh, you're looking out for me. I love it.
Well, we are burying the lead because we are here tonight to talk about a pop culture property that I do not have much experience with. But one of the mission statements of this podcast is to talk about not only things that I like or things that I'm familiar with, but things that other people are passionate about and other people are very familiar with. And tonight we are talking about Pokemon.
Yeah, listen, if you're going to get those millennial ears, then you really, I mean, you sent me the list, just real quick, you sent me the list, and this was not on it. And so I'm scrolling the list of topics that you had picked out, and I'm thinking, what could me and Ryan knock out of the park? And I was like, oh man, Pokemon's not on here. I better call it before somebody, I just assumed it was going to be the first one off the list. So, you know, I'm glad that we were able to snipe it before somebody else could.
Yeah, I think I have too many older Generation X on the older side, which I am now.
So Reality Bites is like a first round pick for these people.
Probably.
Yeah. So
yeah, they love Ethan Hawke. I never saw the list, and I'm wondering like what like the also rans that we could have done.
Well, no, they're on the list is also I have not listened to, and you for anybody out there listening to this podcast right now, please listen to the History on Film podcast because it is a great podcast. But I have not listened to the most recent episode, the Saturday Night Live episode, because I eventually do want to do an episode on Saturday Night Live. So it's part of that. I don't want to listen to it and then.
And then you're just cribbing off of us, which we cribbed off of the guests.
So because it's not going to be as good. So
it's like when the Russian nesting dolls were just, you know, yeah, okay.
But no, I mean, you got right back to me, and Pokemon was the choice. So I want to know why. I mean, we can go back. My experience with Pokemon, I will say to you, my first experience of even knowing what Pokemon was, I used to manage a Suncoast video. Back in 19...
Wow.
I know.
That...
It gives me some geek cred, I know.
I light a candle. When I go to the mall once a year for Santa, I light a candle where the Suncoast video used to be.
It's like that meme where you see it's the Blockbuster video that's closed down and you just see the shadow of where the Blockbuster insignia used to be. I wish I could find a mall somewhere where you could just see. Maybe not, because I would fall to my knees and start to cry in front of it, and old people doing their jogging in the morning would be like, "What's wrong with this guy?" But so
yeah, I'll walk by like an old Suncoast where it was in the mall and just start saying "Ozymandias" by Shelley. You know, just that's what it feels like. Feels like we're walking past the remnants of a lost greater civilization.
So it was about 1998 when I managed a Suncoast in the King of Prussia Mall, which is there's a Mall of America in Minnesota. I think the King of Prussia Mall is the second largest mall in the country, I believe. It's either the second or third.
Sounds right,
mall.
yeah.
And I managed the.
I don't know the difference. You might if you say so.
I'll tell you this right now. We have malls, and I'm doing the italics with my fingers for all the people who can't see me right now, that are closing right now because nobody goes to the mall anymore. This mall will never close, but it's also one of those you go there and there's a Maserati store. There's literally a Maserati sitting next to the Apple store, and it's like, oh, let me go look at the Maserati. My son now, who is 13, that's where I drive him so he can go hang around. But it's not like hanging around the mall when I was a kid, which I didn't do it that much. I'd go to the Walden Books and just hang in there for about 2 hours. This mall, you go and you hang out in the Apple
one out for
store.
the Walden Books.
That's right. I'm bringing them all up. You go into the Apple store, you go into the Maserati store. But it was a high-end mall even back then, but they still had Suncoast, they still had Sam Goody, and that's when we started getting Pokemon cards in, and we're selling Pokemon cards. So that was the first time I was awakened to Pokemon. And I think the last time that I really thought about Pokemon was Pokemon Go back in 2016. I always make fun of my wife because I think she still plays it, and I think she's one of the 3 or 4 people who still does play
I
Pokemon
still play
Go. Okay, well, you might be friends with her.
Not as religiously. I lived in Pokemon Go came out, and then I moved to New York City. Lived there for a year, and then I lived in Dallas for about 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
Good walking cities.
I was going to say, I would think New York would be a good place to play Pokemon.
Yeah,
Go.
New York and Dallas had both like active like Pokemon Go community groups like on Discord and Facebook that you can like on raid dates and stuff. Now I'm in the country in Georgia, and it's not as fun anymore.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, and I definitely think we'll end with Pokemon Go because just to sort of set this up, I mean, you're focused on nostalgia, and the interesting thing about Pokemon is that it has this nostalgia sort of sense to it, but it is the largest media franchise on the planet, and it's something that has continued, from 1998 to the present day. But then within that, there is this time where it was a fad, and Pokemon Go sort of echoes back to that fad part, which is where everybody was in on it, which is what you were talking about. But then, like your kids are playing it, and the games are still coming out, and, me and Ryan are still playing the games. So it's an interesting sort of thing because it is nostalgic for a lot of people, even though it has continued uninterrupted, for the last almost 30 years. So.
Yeah, it'll be 30 years next year, February 27th.
In Japan, it didn't come out here until 98, but yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But so that's good because my first question was going to be like what you know, so you told us your experience, but what do you know sort of about the games themselves? Do you know that this is a game franchise, like a video game franchise first and foremost?
I do. What I know about the video games, almost nothing.
Okay.
And that's why I have you guys on here.
Okay,
so
good.
We're starting there. Great. Okay.
What you just brought up too, though, that is interesting because I think in pop culture, and I don't want to generalize because I'm coming at it from one perspective, and that's not as somebody who is very much into anime or video games at all, who knows about the franchise, but you don't really think about it being around that long. And there's franchises, there's the obvious ones, there's Star Wars, there's comic book characters that have been around forever, but you also have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't think that people think about it, that how long it's been going on, and I don't think people think about something like Pokemon that has evolved, and you just brought up. For you guys, it was something that you guys were into, and my kids are still, and we were talking before we went on the mics, that my son has books upstairs of Pokemon cards. He's not that into it anymore, but he has them up there. He has tins full of Pokemon cards that he now wants to sell, and every time we go to a certain store, they're like, yeah, these aren't worth anything. You're better off just selling them for $20 on Facebook somehow. But this was also me growing up collecting baseball and hockey cards, thinking I was going to find some Wayne Gretzky rookie card or I was a big comic book collector growing up. When I finally sold my comic books, I made a little bit of money off them, but those Web of Spider-Man #1s that I bought back in 1985 didn't turn out to be the cash cows that I thought they were going to be. The New Universe from 1987, all the #1 issues of those, yeah. I should have known when I was walking back from 7-Eleven that this wasn't going to pay for my kids' college.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we can kind of tell you, and we're not gonna plug our show too much, but this does kind of fit in.
Go ahead.
We have an ongoing kind of series of anime interacting with the United States, and so we've done 2 episodes on it so far. Probably do 2 or 3 more. Who knows? probably 100 more. But Pokemon is this very interesting entrance point because even though anime and has been part of the United States popular culture literally since the invention of the television. Astro Boy was on TV in the United States back when it was black and white, but they very purposely de-placed or de-Japanized the show.
They localized it.
Yeah, they localized
it for American audiences.
And really tried to make it seem placeless. But Pokemon is this huge step forward in making anime, like very, obviously Japanese anime palatable to an American audience. It also made what we call like JRPGs, which are Japanese role-playing games, which is a very common video game genre. It made it much more popular in the United States. Prior to this, they really weren't, like Final Fantasy, Dragon Warrior are very, high-profile examples. Those games were not very popular in the United States prior to Pokemon. And so, let me just start at the very beginning. The Pokemon games, in their most neutral, platonic form, is you are usually a 10-year-old boy, like a 10-year-old version of yourself, and you're going on an adventure. There's all of these animals all over, because Pokemon are animals, basically. There's diversity, some live in the trees, some live in the water, some live in the mountains, whatever. And your goal is to assemble a team of them, train them, and then do sort of like, I hate to say like dog fighting, but it's like, basically you're battling your animal friends against other people's animal friends, and the idea is to climb the ranks, of this, criminal organization, basically. This PETA nightmare.
In the first game you get to topple the mafia.
Yeah.
Take on literally the elite trainers of your region, the Elite Four, beat them to the ground. Then you beat up on your best friend / rival, and then after that, after you beat the game, you go and you have to fight a genetically modified Pokemon that's been unleashed from a lab accidentally, and you have to bring it under control and make it your minion, basically. Mm-hmm. That's the game in a nutshell.
Well, the first thing is we laugh about it, but growing up in the 80s, toppling the mafia, you're talking to somebody who had no qualms about going outside and playing with his Rambo First Blood Part 2 Uzi on the street. They used to have the Rambo playset, which was an Uzi, the knife from Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Right.
And parents and kids alike back then, they had no second thought. Handgun toys, that's okay. It doesn't matter. Go out there, kids. Have fun. Just when the lights come on at night, it's fine. So I was laughing as you were talking about that, but in the back of my head, nowadays, yes, I was sitting here thinking, I didn't know about that while my child was playing with this, but my parents wouldn't have cared back in the 80s if you had anything to do with it. I played Miami Vice. What did they care? I was busting drug kingpins when I was in 6th grade.
Well, and that's the thing, too. Like, the arcade generation, which, Ross and I are just a little bit past the arcade generation. We didn't get to experience arcades in their natural environment in the 80s and early 90s. But you guys had Double Dragon. You guys had, all sorts of take down the mob, take down the Yakuza, take down Street Gang number 178, games. And we're generalizing. We're kind of like doing the whole. Ross and I played this game on some of our episodes of like describe movies poorly, and that was kind of me like describing Pokemon poorly. Those elements are in it, but there's a lot more to the game, obviously. But we start to take it down to the weeds and the granular level. You're like, oh yeah, I'm a 10-year-old boy and I'm fighting the mafia, and then I'm going to go and capture. Yeah, as you do, a genetically modified Pokemon. It's like the most powerful Pokemon on the planet. Like that's kind of a deep, weird game when you look at it that way.
But I also think we're kind of undercutting this stuff because it's like it is this popular for a reason, and it did really catch on for a reason, and so the base game, the original games, and the games are always released in sets of 2. So we'll talk about like red and blue were the first ones, gold and silver were the second ones, and no single game has all of the monsters available. So if I have red and you have blue, I can catch most of them on my own, you can catch most of them on your own, but we have to interact with each other using, and this is one of the secrets to the game's success. It was first released on the Game Boy, a console that was pretty much obsolete. I mean, it was in literally the final days of the Game Boy's life cycle.
When was it released on Game Boy?
So the games were released in Japan in '96, and they were already like, gearing up for the replacement for the Game Boy. And then they came out in the United States in '98. So the Game Boy was, 10 years old at that point, which if you think about consoles now, is, ancient. But it was a console that pretty much everybody had, and then you would buy one game, your friend would buy the other, and, somebody would have a link cable. I don't know if you remember the link cable. Nintendo has this great habit of inventing peripherals that are really cool, but really have almost no functionality except for like one thing. The link cable, prior to Pokemon, I think the best thing you could do is like play Tetris or Bomberman with somebody. But Pokemon basically took it, and those games would not be nearly as cool without it. So, because you have all of these, you have this huge diversity of creatures in the game. And even within, I've got this one, I've got a Pikachu. It's like no two Pikachus have the exact same stats. So like if I catch one at level 2 and I raise it up, it'll be stronger than if I catch one at level 20. Just because I spent more time caring for it and stuff like that. And then you will, through the course of the game, be like, oh, I'm really spending a lot of time with this guy, I like this guy, and you develop an attachment, and so everybody has their own favorites. Like they'll say like, oh, Pikachu is the star of the show, or oh, Mewtwo or whatever, but it's like everybody sort of picks like, oh, well, I like this guy. Oh, I have my favorites, and they're nowhere close to Ryan's favorites. You know what I mean? So it's like everybody has this very personalized experience with these games, and I think that's one of the things that made it such a huge success.
Right. And you see this when the newer games come out, because the discourse online, sometimes you'll see like people like, oh, that design for that new Pokemon's stupid, or like, or this generation is stupid or whatever, or I don't like it, whatever. But every design, for everyone's, oh, I hate that design, that Pokemon's stupid, I'm never going to use it, I'm just going to catch it to complete the game, to have the 100% of the game. That is someone's favorite. That is someone's bread and butter. That is someone ride or die Pokemon, and same thing, like a lot of people do this, well, I don't like the new generation, it's better, and this happens, this is not exclusive to Pokemon. I think this is a online discourse for fandom in general, where Ross and I kind of talked about this a recent episode on our show. You liked whatever you liked when you were 12, and you don't deviate from that, like that's what you like, and everything after that is crap, and everything at 12, right? So I think you see that a little bit too playing out. But you'll see people like, oh, well, this new generation is stupid, I don't like it because of the story or the this or that or whatever. But that's going to be somebody's first game in the series. There's a little kid out there that's getting ready. Like, there's a new Pokemon game coming out later this year called Pokemon Legends ZA. That's going to be someone's first game. That's going to be their first entry into the series. And it could be a little kid, generally, or it could be someone older. It could be a grown-up. It could be someone who's retired. It doesn't matter. But that's going to be someone's first game, and that's going to be their favorite generation now, moving forward. And so Pokemon does have that kind of built-in, like, this Pokemon I love. And the beauty of the games, too, is back in the day you had to trade them up, but now you can also, with Pokemon Home and some other technology, you can take those Pokemon from generation to generation, from console to console with you. So those are now with you on your journey for life. And I think that's kind of part of the secret sauce with Pokemon a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like
from
the government
franchise.
I feel like the government agents from Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they say to India, "We've come to the right person to talk about this." So I've come to the right people. Now to segue, now you're talking about
men.
Top men. You're talking about somebody's first experience with it. When was, for both of you, when did you first experience or get into Pokemon? Were you there in '98, or was it a little bit after? Okay.
Oh, Yeah, Ryan, you want to go first?
Sure. So very rarely in my life have I been how did Matt Alt refer, like the person like
tastemaker.
that thing's tastemaker, right? I've very rather been like the trendsetter, the tastemaker, something like on the ground floor. A lot of things that I love, Saturday Night Live, Rush, Monty Python, things like that I found in the late 90s, early 2000s, predated me and were no longer really around. I mean, Rush was, but SNL was, but like other things, Star Wars already existed. And when you were a kid in the 90s, pretty much the only Star Wars you had was the original movies
ones.
And maybe some books. Yeah. Okay. But Pokemon was I was on the ground floor, 98, right there, ready to go. I remember there's a Pokemon commercial, the first Pokemon commercial that came out in the United States. It came out, and they were running this ad on like all of the like Fox Kids and all of the, all of the, children network stuff, long before, like a good 4 or 5 months before the game even came out, right? Like, they were definitely new because it was already popular in Japan. It was already kind of built-in franchise with the toys, the games, the comics, the anime, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
blah.
I want to tell that story once we. Because I did. So, that's a fun one. Yeah.
Right. So they kind of already knew they already saw the success, and they're going to try to replicate it again in the United States. Okay. So they were kind of pumped this commercial a couple months out, and I remember watching TV one afternoon. I'm in 6th grade. And it's the Pokemon commercial where the city bus pulls up, the driver opens up the city bus doors, you see Pikachu, and he's like, "Come on, little buddy," and you see Pikachu get on the city bus with all of these other Pokemon sitting there, and I'm just looking at it going, what the hell is this? This looks weird, and this looks different. And I knew enough about Japanese anime and Japanese pop culture at the time. I didn't know about Pokemon, but I knew enough to be like, that looks something like from Japan. That looks something fun, right? Because at that point, we Toonami had been on. You started getting to like, oh, Pokemon, Japan is cool, right? To a 6th grader, Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z is cool, right? So this is something else from Japan. It's going to be cool, right? I saw this commercial. The commercial ends where the bus driver drives the bus with all the Pokemon on it to a salvage yard. He crushes the bus into the size of a Game Boy and says, "Gotcha." And then the things like, Pokemon, which ones will you catch? Got to catch them all. And I was sitting there going, I don't know what that is, but I know I want it. And from there I was hooked, and I've been hooked now for almost 30 years with it. And that's my journey. I fell off a little bit, of course. Like I got in high school and college, more games were coming out, and I didn't have time. I was doing other things, mostly drinking and not studying. But, 2016 was really when Pokemon Go came out. That was at they were doing the 20th anniversary. They were promoting the 20th anniversary. A new game was coming out. So I went out and bought a 3DS, bought the last 2 generations for that, which was X and Y and ORAS. Played those, kind of rushed through those, like just to get the feel again. I had that good time nostalgia bug bitten by Pokemon Go, and then Gen 7 I played organically, and I've been back on the train for the last 10 years now, 9 years. Choo-choo. So
yeah, so I was a long time. I grew up out in the woods, but I had asthma, and quite frankly, I was a lazy little kid. So I just loved playing video games, and so I had a subscription to Nintendo Power Magazine.
Yes.
And so I would just pore over those, every month, and every so often, when they really wanted to promote something, they would send out like a VHS tape. I don't know if you ever got any of those. They did one for Donkey Kong Country that was really cool, and they sent one out for Pokemon. And like after this,
it was probably past the time that because my brother was the one who used to get but it was probably past the time that he was getting them, so we didn't get any of the sweet VHS tapes that they would send.
They're somewhere at my dad's house. I want to go back and look for them. But so they would send out these VHS tapes, and they sent one out on Pokemon, and I watched that daily, and then for a few months they had like these little insert mini magazines. They did 6 of them, and it was called Pokemon Power, and it was basically like a strategy guide for the game split up into 6 parts. and they released, I think, probably the first 2 or 3 came out before the game itself came out. And so for the months leading up to the game's release, I was just poring over them, looking at the maps. Like, it's a very linear game because it is a Game Boy game, so they really only send you in one direction. But I'm thinking, oh, I can explore here. Oh, and these guys live over here, and these live... So what I think I want to do is I want to go this way. I want to start with this one, and then I want to go here, and I want to catch one of these. Like, just playing what I thought was the game for 2 or 3 months before I ever got my hands on it. And then telling my mom, like, because Nintendo Power's like, oh, this game's going to be huge, going to be huge, going to be huge. So telling my mom, like, hey, call Walmart, tell them, like, see if they'll set one aside. Like, before pre-ordering became, commonplace. And so she called them, and lo and behold, the day before the official release, they called her, and they were like, hey, we got that game in. And so she went to the store, picked him up, and then picked me up from school, and she was like, they were sitting in the back seat, and I just flipped. And, I mean, I played it nonstop, pretty much to current. Just the first generation. I'm what they call like a Gen 1-er. So my favorite games are the first generation of games, and that is a derogatory term a lot of times. But it's like... something that me and Ryan talk about a lot is that for certain things, like Star Wars is a great example. If that first one was not perfect, and there's some technical issues, obviously a Game Boy game is not going to have, sort of the robust menu system and all the other kind of, quality of life stuff, but it's like, it felt so perfect playing that game that it's like, of course the other ones were going to be a success because it's like, they just got you right away.
Yeah, and that's not something you can't overlook. I talked about it on the last episode that I did about the Star Wars prequel, that when I was talking to my guest, and said how would she has a young child that she's going to start showing Star Wars to, and I said to her, what do you think? What order do you think you'll show them in?
The great debate.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying is true. My son, when I sat down with him to watch all of them when he was old enough, he'd already been exposed to the original trilogy, so he knew the magic and was already hooked. But if it's a child, I think that doesn't really know that much about it, you can't show him you can't. I don't mean him. You can't show them the Phantom Menace because I'm sorry. As much as now I don't hate it as much as I used to. You're just not gonna. I don't believe that you're gonna feel the wonder. It's gonna get its claws into you the way. And The Empire Strikes Back is my favorite movie of all time, but Star Wars is the one that hooked me and made me a fan for life.
As much as tariffs are more important than ever now, you still can't start with Phantom Menace.
Yes, whoever knew that whole first paragraph of the opening crawl was really going to be important in the future.
Yeah,
and not in a galaxy far, far away.
I love when people ask me about like the order, like if they're introducing someone for the first time, because I'm a big fan of the machete order. I know that's not this episode we're doing, but I like the machete order. Do you know what that is?
No,
I know
but
Ross
I think
does.
I can guess. What is the machete order?
So the machete order is, and I do an amended version. I think, especially if they're like a young kid, I start with Rogue One. So you do Rogue One, you do episodes 4 and 5. You use episodes 1, 2, and 3 as an extended flashback about how Anakin became Vader, and then you end with Return of the Jedi.
I could definitely see that.
Yeah, and then you can keep on going, 7, 8, 9, or whatever,
Sure, I mean, the next time I rewatch all of them, now I'm going to do that and try and see how it flows that way.
Yeah, the beauty of it keeps the because if you watch episodes 1, 2, if you watch in episode order, the whole Luke and Leia are brother and sister, and Anakin is Darth Vader, and Luke and Leia's dad. The mystery kind of gets erased a little bit because of how they were released. But so if you watch it as an extended flashback, it ends where Luke gets his hand cut off. You find out Vader's his dad. You're like, holy crap, how did that happen? You get to see how that happens for whatever it's worth, and then you can kind of end it with them finding out brother and sister, Ewok celebration, and you kind of still end it on a good note, and not on the bummer note.
I've been on so many other different podcasts. I've been on MASH podcast. I've been on Bob Dylan podcast. It always comes back to Star Wars.
Always.
It always comes back to Star Wars. But
Well,
getting it back, although we could go on, we could go on for another 4 hours about this subject, which maybe we will on a different podcast. But so going back to Pokemon, so for both of you, was video games that started
it was.
both of you?
Yeah, so the video games, I mean, that is the, superstructure, the base structure of the franchise. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about the development of it. I'm a media studies scholar, I'm a historian, and so this is kind of, my bread and butter. But basically, the development of the game began in 1990. And so it took 6 years to develop this game. It was Satoshi Tajiri, Tsunekazu Ishihara, a bunch of, ton of huge names now at Nintendo, but spent 6 years developing.
Masada.
Yeah, spent 6 years developing this game and figuring out the link cable and all this other kind of stuff. And when it was released in Japan, it really it was not a huge success right away. As crazy as that sounds, especially comparing to the American response, but it sort of, because the Game Boy was almost 10 years old at that point, yep. And so they weren't really sure how to market it. It is this very kind of weird sort of game, but they kept seeing that as more people bought into it, they were telling their friends, and so it really spurred this sort of huge interest in the game. It was a word of mouth hit, where it's the sales just kept going up. They didn't start off high and then plummet. And the great thing about the Game Boy was everybody had one. It wasn't like saying, oh, you got to go out buy a brand new Xbox, buy this game to play Madden or whatever. It was everybody either has a Game Boy, knows someone who has an extra Game Boy, and they're old, so you can pick one up pretty easy if you don't have one already. Right. And then you just buy this game, and suddenly you can not just play with your friend, you can play with anybody. Right. And so it became this word of mouth hit, and then they were like, all right, well, we need to develop an anime, we need to develop, a card game. Japan has a much longer history of what we call this multimedia sort of system, where it's we have the thing, and then we have the merchandising, to surround it. Just like Star Wars, was a huge sort of case study in this as well. But so Japan really built it out. So Pokemon was a word of mouth hit in Japan. They spent 2 years building up all of this surrounding media ecosystem for it, and then they're like, all right, now we're going to release it to the rest of the world, and we already have all of the other stuff to go with it. So the anime actually premiered a couple of weeks before the games came out, and it ran on, when it first started, it was just, a show. So different networks in the US were running it, depending on what market you were in. And you can find in a lot of early publishing, hey, find your city, and we'll tell you the call sign of the channel that's running it. So some places it'd be ABC's running it, Fox is running it, WB's running it, and then eventually I think it all just got scooped up by WB, right?
Yeah, it was on Kids WB. Mm-hmm. The first season of the anime is not really. It's technically 2 or 3 seasons lengthwise. I think it was by that midpoint of the first season, around episode 26. Mm-hmm. It was when it was finally picked up by Kids WB. But yeah, I remember in Central Florida, it was on the Fox affiliate for the longest time until it went over to Kids WB, and it was, and of course, there was no, because the TV stations didn't know what they had. They were just being told by corporate, you got to run this show, right? So I remember a lot of them were aired out of order. They were aired at weird times. It wasn't until Kids WB made the contract with Ford Kids, which was the localization company for Pokemon, that was like, no, we're going to show it in order because there's a specific plot line. Because also you have to remember too, children's TV, American children's TV throughout the 80s and 90s, He-Man and Transformers and My Little Pony and all that kind of stuff, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, even the the Disney stuff, DuckTales, there's no overarching story. Every episode's kind of its own self-contained story, and nothing relates back. There's no callbacks. There's no stuff. Whereas Japanese media franchises had more of a, every episode might be its own little contained story or another step, but there's also all this other stuff going on in the background that you know of that might weave in. The villains show up, or
it's part of a larger narrative.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, a lot of what we think of it for like adult TV, you know.
Well, I was going to say too, I feel like around that time, which I would think is around 99, 2000, 2001. I do think, and maybe you guys will know more than me, so tell me if I'm wrong. For me, that's when I was becoming more aware of Pokemon, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z. So that was, I think that's when it was becoming a lot of Japanese anime and animation was becoming more popular with kids. I mean, when I was a kid watching Battle of the Planets, I didn't realize that had a whole history behind that until later in the 2000s when the internet came around. And then, I always wondered why it seemed like it was kind of disjointed. Not until realizing that, this had a whole different life in Japan.
Or that Robotech was like three different animes Frankenstein together and stuff. You know, I think, and Ross and I talked about this, and we did our second episode on our second half, our second part of the anime episode. We kind of talked about that, how by the time Pokemon hit in 98, since about 95, 96, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, you had Cartoon Network doing Toonami. They were showing Speed Racer again. At the same time, over on the Sci-Fi Channel and AMC, you had a lot of like the Godzilla and the kaiju movies from Japan from the 50s, 60s, and 70s being shown on weekend afternoons on AMC. Sci-Fi was also starting to show, because anime was becoming more popular. They were starting to show older anime movies, full-length movies from the 70s, like Galaxy Express 999 was being shown on Sci-Fi. I remember watching that. What's the not Castle in the Sky, but there was I can't remember the name, but there was some anime that were kind of talked about within like media circles, the anime circles, sci-fi circles, that were starting to be shown on American TV. So at the time Pokemon hit 98, there was about 2-3 years of kids and teenagers and young adults. There was, it was a good swath of society that was already kind of primed for, like I said, Japan is cool. Japan makes cool, I'm in 6th, 7th grade going, Japan makes cool shit, right? And so, you're coming into that with that mind frame, and then Pokemon hits fully, it's like Athena coming from Zeus's head. It comes fully formed. You have a game. You like the game? You want to watch anime? Here, jerks, here's your anime. You want to play a card game? We got a card game for you. You want toys? We got toys for you. You want bath towels? We got frickin' bath towels for you. It was kind of like that. And we were ready because we had been primed for that.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that we discussed basements earlier. I'm down here with the remnants of toys that my children haven't played with now in years, but there are probably Pokemon cards sitting around down here somewhere. There are the Pokeballs that you can pop open and the different characters come out of them that I know my son used to have. You could connect them to a belt or a bandolier that you could wear. And he would sit down here on Netflix on the TV, and when he was about 8 or 9, so he was a little bit older, I could plop him down on the TV. It would be 2.5 hours of Pokemon cartoons going one after the other. So you're right. It's already made right there for kids. If they're into it, they have it. They have all these outlets to go to get
and right. What's so interesting is that when they were preparing the U.S. localization, they really yes, a lot of people like me and Ryan were sort of primed or like Manchurian candidated into being ready for this, but there was a real hesitancy because a lot of them were thinking like, this is not going to sell in the U.S. Final Fantasy and Dragon Warrior were huge games in Japan that just flopped here. And so they were talking like, well, can we swap it out and make it like baseball players? I mean, they were thinking about doing real major overhauls to the game. And thankfully, they decided to stay the course.
American Industries wanted to quash creative instincts of other people and just try to make mass market entertainment? No way.
Well, and I think Nintendo of America didn't know. They're like, how can we because, again, even games that are really Japanese in its DNA, like Animal Crossing, right, was, which came out a little bit later in the States. I want to say that came, I think, 98 or 99?
The first Animal Crossing? Yeah,
it
was a little bit later, right?
Yeah, but you had a lot of games that were, they would get, like our friend Matt All says, they filed the serial numbers off to make it look less Japanese, and and that was done, of course, with a lot of anime, like we were just talking about, a lot of games, a lot of popular games that they knew, hey, this is going to be popular in the United States, but we kind of have to make it less Japanese. It's kind of offensively Japanese right now. In Pokemon, they didn't know how to do that because it was almost too Japanese. It was like, and we can get into like kawaii culture and, at the end of the day, Pokemon's what they call a monster taming game. Monster taming games were nothing new in Japan, right? And Nintendo America was like, we don't know how to sell this to American kids, to the point where like, well, let's redesign some of the characters. And there's a very famous story of them saying, hey, Pikachu would look better if we made it look more like a tiger with tits. Like, and that was one of the things that they were going to do, that they were like going to make Pikachu, they were going to yassify and sexify Pikachu to make it more palatable to an American audience, thinking, well, young American men might not buy it because it's cute, but throw some tits on there, they might buy it. I'm serious. This was
I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are serious.
They have minutes from these meetings in Nintendo of America where Nab Asagara, who was the head localizer for Nintendo of America on a lot of games, but he ended up being the head localizer on Nintendo of America. He said, no, we're not doing that. And I think what helped that the localization team for Nintendo of America, you had a lot of people that were Japanese American. They were second, third generation, some of them, and some of them were expats and immigrants too. So you had people that kind of understood both cultures. They were like, no, we can make this work. Just give us a minute, we can make it work.
Trust
and they
us.
did. Yeah, exactly. And some of what's so great about some of the with the localization of the American Red and Blue version of Pokemon, a lot of Asagara's sense of humor, some of his pop culture references were being like stuff that he liked was put into it, which kind of became part of like the DNA and kind of how the sense of humor of the game and kind of some of the dialogue that we now know of Pokemon in the States is because of his efforts and his team. And there's also stories about how like the French localization is very Frenchified. There's a lot of French sensibilities put into the game, and the French games are also kind of viewed as like almost not their own thing. It's still Pokemon, but the dialogue's going to be a little bit different. The sense of humor is a little different. And I think, again, that's what makes Pokemon so great, is that you had a lot of people in a lot of different areas like, no, we're going to tweak it just enough to make it palatable for local audiences, but keep true to itself, and it became a worldwide hit. Another thing I want to add, Ross mentioned earlier, the original games were on the Game Boy. Everyone had them. They're in black and white. For anyone familiar with the Game Boy games, they are not. None of the games on Game Boys were elegant in their graphical display. It was very limited what they can do. But Nintendo, for intents and purposes, did a lot of great. There's a lot of great Game Boy games to this day, right? And I think what helped Pokemon succeed both in Japan, the United States, and later on in France and Germany and UK and Brazil and everywhere else it went, like it was like a domino effect. Every year, every 6 months, it was coming out, and you're like, it's a hit here now, it's a hit here now. Because the games were in black and white, they were pixelated, they were 16-bit games, or 16-bit on the Game Boy. It also allowed you had to kind of use your imagination. Mm-hmm. You had to it wasn't elegant. And I think that's also where the anime and some other things came in, because the anime had it was in full color. It was in full animation. These battles you're having, Charizard, you fire blast, and it's like a little stream of flame, it doesn't look that impressive, especially to a modern audience now, 30 years later. But then you can go watch the anime and see Charizard do that in life, and you're like, oh, Charizard is a badass, right? Charizard is cool. Charizard does use, like people are getting fried, man. Like that, I think that helped because you're allowed to use your imagination when playing the game with you, whether you're playing alone, playing with friends, whatever.
Oh, sure. I mean,
and then the anime kind of filled in the gaps for you.
That's a definite. That's got to be a definite point that kids, especially of that generation, latched onto. I even remember, and I come from remembering playing Atari games, where the first Spider-Man Atari game that you would spin the web and climb up the side of the building, and in my head I had to build up the whole story of what I was doing. I'm going after the Green Goblin. This is what we're doing, and even the old Superman game where it was just flying, or the Batman games that came right after the Batman movies that were a little bit better with the graphics, but with all of those games, I can remember River Raid for Atari, that I had a whole backstory built up in my head of the mission I was flying and who I was flying for, and I was flying for the spy agency, and I think that's something that's a little bit lost with. You could talk about video games, you could talk about movie special effects. Now that you can do almost anything and put almost anything on the screen, you do lose a little of that, where you're building up your own backstory and creating that story for the game you're playing, because, like you said, it's only just this little line that's supposed to be a stream of flame, but when you do finally get to see the anime and see the cartoons, you actually can see what you did build up in your head.
Well, and also, it's just these games are very personalized in a way that a lot of games weren't at that time. So the way all of these games start is, to begin your adventure, you're given a choice of 3 what we call like starter Pokemon. And so at that very point, you have taken a path that, most of your friends have not. And so the total flow of the game, because they have different, elemental types. Like, I picked Bulbasaur, so the early going of the game is pretty easy for me. But somebody who picked Charmander is going to have a tougher time because, the battles are sort of, not in their favor early on. So they have to, be more willing to pull from, other kind of Pokemon that they can catch. And so it gives you, just by making these very simple sort of choices throughout, like a lot of personalization, customization, and then just, like helping to reinforce, like, oh, well, this guy is mine, this is my friend because he helped me get through X, Y, and Z, or, oh, I really leaned on this one here. So it was a very interesting sort of thing. And then, like I mentioned with the JRPG style games, Atari, original NES, a lot of action and platforming games is what we call them, where it's like the focus of the game is shooting or jumping or running and jumping or running and shooting. There was not a lot of, reading comprehension involved. Whereas in Japanese game, the Japanese role-playing games, a lot of it is, all right, I've entered the town. I'm going to talk to everyone in the town and see what's going on. I'm going to explore every house in the town, and then move on to the next dungeon or the next, challenge or whatever. It's like, it's a much more, like, sort of lived experience, if that makes any kind of sense. I mean, these games are so popular now that it seems almost trivial to mention it, but it's like, at the time, there was a real concern, like, Americans don't like these games, so just the, fundamental structure of Pokemon, people are not going to like. And of course, we joke a little bit about sort of it relying on combat, but one of the great things about the early games, and then it's been reflected in the later ones, is that the way people in the games, like in the universe, interact with Pokemon is not just, oh, these are my, combat, pets, or, like these things have the worst existence imaginable. It's like a lot of people are like, oh, well, I just like to, collect them, or, oh, this is my pet, the same way you'd think of like your pet dog. Like when you talk to people in the games, they're saying like they're having all of these different kinds of relationships with Pokemon. And so in some of the later games, you can go to, like, enter them in beauty pageants. Like, there's all these sort of ways to engage with them that are not reflected in the earlier games mechanically, but that they are through the conversations that you have. if that makes any kind of sense. So it's like
No, it
you
does.
see a fully fleshed out kind of environment, and then you also see that reflected in the anime and all the other kind of stuff. And so I think for the reason why we're talking about this sort of like as a fad is that for me and Ryan's generation, like the early years of Pokemon, people who were not otherwise gamers were engaging with this stuff. Like I can think of a lot of kids, and not to, stereotype, but like a lot of girls in my class who were not themselves gamers, like were engaging with Pokemon. A lot of, guys who were not necessarily gamers were like, oh, well, I guess I got to buy some of these cards and stuff. Like, I think nowadays, yeah, most kids will probably engage with it in some form or another, but it's like, there are also going to be some kids who are like, whatever, like, that's not for me. Just the same way they'd be like, Star Wars isn't for me, or, wrestling or whatever isn't for me. But it's like, everybody was engaging with it in that first 4 to 6 year span. And so in that sense, it was a fad, where it's like, people were engaging with it who might not have otherwise. And the reason why that fad ended is just because it was so successful that it broke, containment, or it broke escape velocity into becoming just a part of global popular culture. Like it ascended.
Being a pandemic to being endemic, and I
Yes.
think that's
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of relates to the question I was going to ask next. With both of you getting into Pokemon, did it lead to discovering? Did you find when you get into certain parts of pop culture, it can lead you to discover other parts of pop culture? From getting into it, what did it lead you guys to?
I'm hyper competitive, but only for like the most nerdiest kind of stuff. I got into Magic the Gathering around the same time I got into Pokemon. I am still hyper competitive with Magic the Gathering. I am kind of retired as a competitive Pokemon player. But I still play all of the new mainline games. But that's really just because they're fun. It's a fun game to be able to walk around in, for 100 hours. And I always try to, find my old favorites, and then I kind of, pick up some new ones along the way. But yeah, I think it brought out that sort of I can be competitive in something that relies on my mind, just as much as we talk about esports, of the last several years becoming this thing, but it's like Pokemon was really one of the first I know there were video game competitions prior to that, but I think
a wizard.
Yeah. Well, the Wizard, the book Console Wars, and then there was a good little documentary film about that, talking about Tetris and some of the earlier kind of game competitions. But Pokemon was the first esport in the sense that your roster might differ, tremendously, from your opponent.
Right.
So I think that's certainly a huge resonant part for me. And then, I think it got a lot of people into anime. It certainly, I don't know that it got me more into it. I think it just, by virtue of it getting more anime on TV that I had access to living out in the woods, it sort of made that process easier, made me jump through fewer hoops.
We forget nowadays where everything is at your fingertips. All you have to do is type it in and you can find it somewhere. That I'm sure that it did open doors for networks to bring in more for kids, and not to be, after having the experience with Pokemon, to not be worried and not think, oh, this is too Japan, this is too foreign for kids, they're not going to like it, they're not going to get it. And everything's not going to be, we keep going back to Star Wars, you see it with the first thing that's so big, there's always going to be either copycats or everybody's going to try to do the same thing, and not everything's going to hit, and some stuff is going to hit.
There was definitely kind of a gold rush of every network trying to get the next Pokemon.
Sure.
Some had middling success, like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Digimon. Others, like Cardcaptor Sakura and some other franchises, did not. And I think, at the same time, you had other things going on in pop culture, like Harry Potter was also becoming very big at this time. So I think you had certain things that were capturing. You saw the same thing with Harry Potter too. Like Harry Potter came out, and everyone after that was trying to do the next Harry Potter and in children's fantasy novels,
Hunger
right?
Games and all that.
Hunger Games. Well, even before that, you had Series of Unfortunate Events and the Spiderwick Chronicles and all these things that were trying to be Harry Potter. And so you saw the same thing happening with Harry Potter because they were kind of happening in tandem around the same time of 98, 99, 2000, 2001. And, I think a lot of times kids are smarter than we give them credit for. And I think a lot of even kids know when they're being pandering, when they're being pandered to. And I know I definitely felt like when they try to Yu-Gi-Oh's next big thing. And I watched some of the anime and I tried playing the game. I'm like, I don't get this. This is not my thing. Same with Digimon. Digimon, the show, I enjoyed a little bit more than the card game. The card game just seemed very weird and convoluted. I think what helped Pokemon, and I didn't get into Magic the Gathering as much as Ross did. I tried. Magic the Gathering.
I tried.
You tried, and granted, when he tried, I was a little part of my personal lore. When he the summer he tried to get me into Magic the Gathering, I had just broken up with my first girlfriend, my first high school girlfriend. So I was like, that first breakup is just the saddest you've ever been in your life. And so Ross was trying to be a good friend and taking me along and building me decks to tournaments. And I was just I was just happy to have a friend and be not in my room crying on a Friday night. So, so it wasn't, I never picked up Magic because I think Magic was also associated with a very sad time in my life. But he did try, bless him. And I have gone back and I played more online and stuff like that with the video game versions, the online versions, and I enjoy it. I have fun. I can't remember where I was going. I was going somewhere with this.
I think you were going to go with. I think what you're. What I was following. It seems like the people behind Pokemon actually did put their passion into it and wanted to build a world out of it, and it made it. They hit that special sauce that for it could be in France, it could be in Germany, it could be in America, and there could be little tweaks to it, but everybody could enjoy it. And they actually wanted to world build instead of just you're talking about Digimon. It just goes into the junk drawer with GoBots and everything else.
Exactly.
Tries to jump onto a fad.
Right. Well, like I was saying, I think kids felt like Pokemon, because I know I felt this way because I was the target audience. They were trying to pander to me and be like, "Oh, you like Pokemon? Well, get in there, asshole." It's Yu-Gi-Oh kind of thing. It was kind of
that was the actual ad campaign, I think. Or you're a dumb kid. You'll eat anything. Here's Digimon. And I definitely felt like I was being talked down to by some of these other franchises. They just wanted me to buy, and I'm like, yeah, but Pokemon, it's fun. There's no connect. There was just something magic in Pokemon, and I think why Pokemon remains relevant too is because a lot of the same people that were involved 30 years ago, some of them are now elder statesmen in the company, but a lot of them are still advising, or still involved, or still executives in the company, and I think that helps. Where you have, I don't know to say they're protective of it or whatever, but it's their baby. These were, and so they want to keep, until they retire, until they die, they want to keep shepherding it. And you see this also with Game Freak, which is the publishing company for the creative company for the games. You see Junichi Masada, who was the composer and a programmer on the first game, became the director on the second game. He's directed several games, and now he's kind of stepping back as a executive producer of the franchise, and giving the younger creatives, the younger programmers, the younger art directors their time to shine, and kind of guiding them into making the next game. So these people that have been around from the beginning are still kind of around. I think that's different, where it doesn't feel like other franchises where, again, like Pokemon or Digimon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or some of these other things that try to sell us on was one guy comes, one group of creatives oh, this is our series, we're going to do this, and then they walk away, and then someone else makes the next series, and there's no connective tissue, and it's a different type of enterprise. And I think that
kind of comes through with the games, especially with the games.
I was going to ask that if there are still some of the original developers, the original creatives. I mean, it's almost like you're seeing it right now with, we're recording this about a week and a half after Amazon is taking full control of the James Bond franchise. That was basically family run for 60-year existence. And I like James Bond. I'm not a super fan of James Bond, so I'm interested to see what happens. But I understand for people who feel invested in that franchise are nervous and scared because now it's just another IP that's going to be tossed around and taken apart. And I'm sure they're going to try to make good movies, but there's something... And there's been good James Bond movies, there's been bad James Bond movies, but... reading up on it, it's been basically a family business for 60 years, and now it just becomes another IP
exactly
for a big corporation to use and spin off and make money off of.
Yeah, I think what helps Pokemon too is they are, so you have the Pokemon Company International, okay, which is the company that owns the Pokemon Company. It is partly owned by 3 entities. That's Game Freak, Creatures, which is the other company that came in and helped Game Freak get the company, another video game company to help Game Freak get the first games across the finish line because they were struggling. Like Ross said, they were in development for 6 years.
Yeah.
And Ross, I'm sure, told the story how like the original game got completely deleted at one point. And Nintendo is the third stakeholder of the Pokemon Company International. I think Nintendo being involved helps because Nintendo is very protective of their IP. They don't, Nintendo, both Nintendo in Japan and Nintendo of America, they don't just put anything out. Like, now the Pokemon games come out more frequently because they, at the end of the day, they're a huge media franchise, and the new game will sell a new anime, will sell new toys because it's new Pokemon, right? A new generation. But you'll see Zelda, Animal Crossing, Metroid, Kirby, Mario, the other big tentpoles in Nintendo. Sometimes it could be 10 years between the latest edition of the mainline game because Nintendo is very protective of that IP. They want the next Mario game to be the best Mario game you ever played, and they want the next game on the next console when they do a flagship Mario game to be the best Mario game you ever played. I think that also helps with Nintendo's involvement with Pokemon, kind of helps keep Pokemon fun and fresh and different, and it's not just like, here's more crap to sell to the kids and they don't care, they'll buy anything, right? I think there's a little bit more. Yes, they're a game company. Yes, they want to sell toys. Yes, they're trying to sell something to you, but they're also trying to make something that's worth buying at the end of the day. Whereas you see that with Nintendo, you see that with some other companies and some other corporations, some other that are protective of their IP, and then you see other companies that aren't protective of their IP. I would say Star Wars for a while, Lucasfilm was not protective of their IP, and now that they're under Disney's tutelage, fiefdom, whatever you want to call it, Disney's a little more protective. Like, no, we're not just going to slap anything with a Star Wars label on it and sell. We're going to make sure there's some quality behind it, and. We can kick the tires. In theory, you can kick the tires. But I'm thinking about the early 2000s. I'm thinking of like the early 2000s. There was, Lucasfilm was licensing Star Wars to any like mobile game, and there was a lot of like shovelware schlock crap that had the Star Wars name on it that was kind of tarnishing the brand. Disney's like, no, we're not. We're going to make sure. And Nintendo does the same thing. I think certain companies have that protectiveness of it. Other companies don't. I think that has helped a little bit with Pokemon. Is that Nintendo is a little protective of Pokemon and making sure that it's not just another game franchise. They want to keep it the largest media franchise, and by doing that, you have to be selective and protective.
Yoda stories rules, though.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the mobile game. It was like the Tower Builder game. It was like a Star Wars.
Any tower builder is shovelware inherently, yeah.
Yeah, so it was just like, I remember like prior to 2013, there was a lot of like, download this Star Wars app, and and it's like Yoda making fart noises. You're like, what the hell are you? The Yoda fart app on your iPhone now.
I'm surprised that didn't make millions.
So,
I mean,
and then
I am the weirdo that would download it, but I think we're few and far between.
so so this phase that we're talking about is commonly referred to as Pokemania, and I think the best way to sort of like if anybody's curious and wants to see, like, oh, what were they talking about on the Today Show or the New Yorker or whatever, like Pokemania was this sort of fad phase, and it ran for the first 2 generations of the game. The first generation, Red and Blue, which is what we've been talking about mostly so far, and then the second generation of the games, which released in 2000 here. And I remember playing Silver and watching the first season of Survivor, just to sort of put
right.
this in time.
Yeah.
But
Timestamp on that one.
and Ryan is the gold and silver expert more than me. But I will say that those are probably rightfully considered the best Pokemon games made.
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. I think they are, for me, Gold and Silver are the best because there's a lot of innovation in Gold and Silver that they brought to the game that became standards of the franchise. Now, Pokemon, and I want to back up real quick. We'll refer to Pokemon as generations, but that's a fan distinction of the Pokemon company has never said, oh, this is Gen 1, this is Gen 2, this is Gen 3. This is just like, okay, these are this, you had Red, Blue.
Iterations, yeah.
Yeah, iteration. You had, in Japan you had red and green, then blue, then yellow. In the United States we had red, blue, and yellow. Then you had gold and silver and crystal, which was like the third one. They used to do like a third. It was like the third one was like the definitive version. It was always like the third version.
Director's cut, yeah.
Director's cut had all the extra stuff in it. And they've gotten away from that in the last several years. But Pokemon doesn't break it up by generation; they break it up by region. So whatever region that game is. So like in the region, the region of the first games was Kanto. Region in Gen 2 it was Johto, and then you have Hoenn, and et cetera, et cetera. For me, Gold and Silver is the best game because it introduced a lot of things that have become standards to the game, like attaching items to Pokemon. You could attach items to your Pokemon, and depending what the item was, it could do different things. Like certain types of berries or certain types of healing items would, like, if I have a water Pokemon, I can put the berry on it that stops it from being burned. It gets attacked by a fire Pokemon that would burn it normally. It now doesn't get burned, or it heals the burn, or something like that. Or I attach this item to a Pokemon. If I trade that Pokemon, it now evolves into a new Pokemon that it couldn't evolve before with this item. The only thing that got introduced later that became a standard of the game was abilities, and that was in the third generation of the game in Hoenn. Abilities, pretty much they add like a secondary kind of
layer of customization. Yeah, like
right.
Sort of inherent traits.
Right. So like a Pokemon, maybe there's a Pokemon called Hardy, right? And a Hardy Pokemon, it's a fighting type ability, right? A Hardy Pokemon, and normally Ghost type Pokemon can't be affected by fighting type, but if they have the Hardy ability, they can actually affect Ghost type Pokemon, stuff like that. That got added on the third generation of the game, and really the kind of the core of the game in what we call the meta for like competitive and how Pokemon are raised, how you battle them, was kind of developed in those first 3 generations, and it hasn't really changed. They've added gimmicks and new things that only exist for one generation to make it new and exciting and different. But at the core of the games, those 3 games kind of built it, and really a lot of that was in Gen 2. For me, what I loved about Gen 2 is that, one, it came out in color. So we went from we went from Dorothy in Kansas all the way into Oz with a full color game, which was finally great. Like, oh wow, the world is fully realized. There was a slight graphical update, but it wasn't changed so much that it didn't look the same. Pokemon, for the longest time, and even now in the modern iteration, there's a style. What's the word I'm looking for here?
Aesthetic.
It's like,
aesthetic, but no, like, and when companies like because when I worked in corporate America, you have a style guide. There's definitely a
Style
style guide.
Yeah.
Style guide kind of that they've retained over the 30 years, right? Also, what I love about Gen 2 is that Gen 2 had a very wild development cycle where it came out in it as early as 97. Pokemon Company knew they had, by 97 in Japan, Pokemon Company knew, hey, we have a hit on our hands and we almost don't know what to do with it. Like, you know, I was just reading before I came on, doing some preparation. I believe it was Ken Sugimori, who is the art director of Pokemon games, and he's now like an elder statesman of Pokemon. He's still involved, but he's not like the head designer of Pokemon anymore. He said in an interview, I believe it's Ken Sugimori, that we would have been thrilled and we would have made our money back if we even just sold 1 million units in Japan, and we end up selling, like, I think now it's up to 45 million units or something like that. It's you know, and the number goes up every year. It's like, oh, we sold more units because of the secondary market, right? They're like the games are still being bought and sold and traded and stuff online and everything. So they're still, you know, the numbers go up, like, not now it's like by like inches instead of feet, but you know, every year you still see, oh, we're still selling red and blue and yellow worldwide. And so they had this hit on their hands, and they're like, okay, we need to make a sequel. And they already kind of, like a lot of creators do, already had an idea for a sequel, like a lot of writers do for movies. Oh, if this is a hit, here's where I want to go with it. They had an idea of where they wanted to go with it. But because of the wild process of the first generation, and it took them so long because they were a burgeoning, fledgling game studio, they were still that small game studio. Like they didn't, you know, they didn't increase their numbers or anything like that with all that, you know, they all this money, and they're like, well, what do we do with it? We'll make another game, but it's the same 10 people making the game again, right? And so that caused some problems. So it kind of went through another weird process where they started introducing in 97, as far back as 1997, they started introducing, hey, here's what the sequel's going to look like. And from the early iterations of what they call Space World, which was a game expo hosted by Nintendo in Japan in the 90s, from what got introduced in in Space World 97 at that expo, for time what you got 2 years later in 99 and then 2000 in the States, were two widely different games. And what I really love about Gen 2, you start looking at it from a cultural studies and a media studies perspective, you start looking at some of the Pokemon designs that were scrapped. Because I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, the original beta from what they call the Space World demo, because there was a demo that was playable at Space World, the files got leaked online. And people were finally going in and seeing all these Pokemon that we haven't seen before, right? The Pokedex, the Pokemon available in that second game, were wildly different. Now you'll see some elements like, oh, I see where that one became this one, but it definitely has that kind of, there's like, Ross and I are big fans of the Disney parks from a Imagineering design, ride design standpoint. And you know, they say at Disney, you know, ride designs are never abandoned. They're never abandoned. They're just retooled. And you'll see like how this ride became that ride, but originally it was going to be this, and now it became that 10 years later, right? You also see that now with Pokemon to this day, where you see, oh, there's those early designs of Pokemon that became other Pokemon that we've seen now over the intervening years in iterations. The original second game was ambitious, whereas the first game, you're in one section of Japan, because the idea is you're always like in a kind of an alternate universe Japan. They've gotten away from that over the years, but originally you're in Japan, you're in modern Japan, but it's just an alternate world. Like now, there's Pokemon instead of animals, right? Whereas in the first game, you're in the Kanto region, which is pretty much the Tokyo metropolitan area. This game, where you're going to be all of Japan, you're going to be played all of Japan. That meant the sections of Japan, like Kanto was like one city now versus an entire region. But you can see these weird, they were kind of just throwing a lot of things at a wall and seeing what would work and what wouldn't work. Eventually, the final game we got, you're in the Johto region, which is based on Kyoto. It's in full color. 100 new Pokemon were added to the rolls, so you had 151 in the original. Now you have 100 more, so bringing a total of 251. A lot of innovation, and the beauty of that game for me as a kid is the internet. The internet we have today is not the internet we had in '99, right? The internet in '99 was a really different. It was like being on a different planet compared to how the internet is now. There wasn't a lot of information available because there wasn't a lot of information available in Japan in '98 and '99 because the game hadn't come out yet, and we had to wait a whole another year in the United States. So there was like grainy screenshots and rumors of like, oh, this is going to be in the game, and it was never going to be in the game because somebody played the demo at Space World in '97, wrote a blog about it in '98, and now it's being translated to English in '99. So you have like 3 layers of telephone being played here. So Gen 2 existed in like this, the Gold and Silver existed like in this mythic, doesn't even exist. Sure. It's like, it was like an Atlantis. It was like a Lumeria. It was like a Holy Grail. It was, you know, if I can get on a plane and teleport to Japan right now, I could find out, but I'm 13 years old and I'm broke and, there's no way for me to find out. So when the games finally came, you're like, oh, wow, this thing does exist, right? And it's finally in my hand and I'm playing it. Oh, my God, all right? And it was so much better the second time, the playing the second time around. And the really interesting thing, Ross mentioned Dragon Warrior earlier. Dragon Warrior in the States, up until very recently, they got the rights back. They call it Dragon Warrior. It's called Dragon Quest. In the lull years before Pokemon Gold and Silver came out, Dragon Quest, because they have a lot of creatures you can battle in the games, like as an RPG. So you're in the dungeons, the bat creature, like that, yeah. It's the slime creature, whatever. Square, well, it was just Enix. That it wasn't Square Enix yet. They hadn't merged. Enix was like, hey, we got all these funky little creatures. People seem to like these creature games, and they made their own Pokemon clone that came out in the spring of 2000. And I played the hell out of that game because now going from 98 to 2000 seems like a blink of the eye. I feel like I'm still 2001. Sure. Like I'm just now coming out of the pandemic, and it's been 4 years. Back then, to a 12 or 13-year-old.
For a kid, yeah.
Yeah, for a kid, 2 years might as well be an eternity, man. Like you have no concept of time. So like I was trying to find all these other things to plug the little Pokemon-shaped hole in my heart that I couldn't, because I'd beaten Red and Blue, Yellow came out, I got that, beat that. Pokemon Stadium came out, got that, beat that. I've been doing the card game, but the card game wasn't always my favorite. The anime, the new season of the anime wasn't out yet, so it's just reruns on TV. So I had this big Pokemon-shaped hole in my heart, and I started like playing these other monster taming games just to like fill the void. But Pokemon often imitated, never duplicated, right? When Gold and Silver came out, like, oh, it's like going from like Coke Zero, like new Coke back to regular Coke. There is just something. There's a smell. There's a feel. There's a taste to it that's just different. And yeah, the Gold and Silver games to me are still my favorite. But I've played the only generation, like I said, we use that iteration. The only games I haven't played were what we call the Gen 5 games that were in the now I'm blanking on the name of the region. It's based on New York, the region. It's not Sinnoh. And I'm sure there's people listening like yelling now, like, "It's this one, idiot."
They can send in. They can send in emails.
Send your hate mail too.
Yes.
Find me on Bluesky
with hate mail. That's fine.
Yeah. Find me on Bluesky, I guess. But again, I didn't play the Gen 5 games, right? Because they came out. I was in college, and I did not have the device it was on. I didn't have the time. I was doing other things.
You would put away childish things.
Well, no, I'm still doing childish things. Not entirely. It was just.
Do we ever?
There's a lot more alcohol involved in my childish things at that point, and
different childish things.
yeah, I'm definitely still a kid. But I've gone back and I played all the games that I kind of got caught up on. The last game I played when it came out until 2016 was Gen 3, the Hoenn games. They're a lot of fun. I like those. They're not my favorite, but they're a lot of fun. They did a lot of new things. but I've gone back and played all of them, and Gen 2 is still kind of my favorite. But the last several games that have come out that I've got to play fresh on the ground, opening that, release date, those have been a lot of fun, and it kind of does scratch that nostalgia itch of like being back in my room, but now I'm like in my living room. I'm playing it on the TV. It's on a console. It's not on a Game Boy anymore. But yeah, the Gen 1, Gen 2, and then Gen 3, and then it started tapering off. That's when, started. It's about 2004, and that's also when you saw Pokemania stop kind of losing steam. It was still around, but it had definitely guys Ross and I's age who were like in 5th and 6th grade in '98 when it came out, and a little bit younger, a little bit older. We were all kind of growing up now. We're all like in high school, leaving high school, going into college age, or some of us were already square into college. So we were just doing other things, but you had kids that were younger than us that were coming up behind us that were still watching the anime, buying the games, playing the card game. It never went away. It just wasn't that peak thing. And then Pokemon Go 2016, around the time of the 20th anniversary, that's when it just came back in full force.
That was my next question. I was going to say, for somebody who tangentially knows about Pokemon, that's when I started getting attention to it again, because it feels like it was that second wave. It was a phenomenon in 2016 because everybody was playing it. Here we're outside of Philadelphia, so we go to the Jersey Shore for vacation, and that summer walking on boardwalks, all you would see were, instead of people looking at their phones talking, it was everybody walking around, and you could see on the screens it was Pokemon Go the whole time on the boardwalk.
Well, and what's so interesting, so like we're talking about these generations and these different games, and the way that Pokemon introduces new creatures is by saying like, well, now you're in a different part of the world, and so certain animals live here that just don't live anywhere else. And so that's how, they justify these ever-expanding rosters. But when Pokemon Go released, it only had the first generation characters. So it was specifically the Pokemania characters and those alone. And so I think the reason why Pokemon Go had this, obviously it still exists, people still play it, but it's like the reason why it had this fad appeal for a lot of people is the people who were swept up by Pokemania the first time. Now that you don't even have to buy a game, you just download it on your phone, which you already have. It's like it's a fun, sort of easy way to reconnect. And, this is the nostalgia basement, so it's like, it just sort of pulls into that sort of draw and appeal. And so the people who were not as invested as Ryan and I, it takes very little for them to, let me give it a try. Oh, I remember this guy. Oh, I liked this one. This one is a cute one, It
definitely roped me back in. It was one of those things where, I saw, you see commercials for the newer games and stuff like that. A friend of mine, he had a sister that was a little bit younger than us in college, and she was still playing, I guess it was Gen 5 and Gen 6 at that point on 3DS, and the DS and 3DS. And I saw the games, I'm like, okay, that's cool, it's still around. I had no connection to the new Pokemon or whatever, the new characters. Hadn't watched the anime in years, Then Pokemon Go comes out and just it pulled me back in, and it brought me back to 6th grade. I was like, because especially if you were there on the ground floor in '98, like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, right? You're going to be in your late 20s when in 2016 when that hit, and it was like, and the world is kind of, in the intervening years you had 9/11, the Iraq War, we've had some crap in between. It kind of brought me. To me, it kind of brought, and of course, this is on the eve of the 2016 election too. So the world hasn't gotten quite better, right? For a lot of people, you're like, oh, we're still some of the same people are involved in making the world awful.
Yeah,
for me,
Pokemon go to the polls.
I can tell you the consultants that told her to say that charged her a lot of money to come up with that. And as someone who's worked in politics, as someone who's done consulting on congressional campaigns before, yeah. Well, I got out in 2016. Yeah, everyone can draw their own conclusions from that. And someone who's had to workshop that type of thing. That was the best idea they had on paper. There was like 10 other ideas that got scrapped, and that was the best one. Yeah, it's a grift, guys. You know.
No, but you're right. What you were bringing up. I mean, never underestimate the power of nostalgia, especially as we all get older. I find it as I've been looking for subjects for this podcast, and then why I wanted to do it is because I feel like I had that certain age when I was in my early 20s into my 30s, when I wasn't married, I didn't have kids, I had a little bit more time, a little bit more money to myself because I wasn't spending it on mortgage payments or car payments or feeding my children and clothing them, where I could go to all the movies I wanted to go to and discover all the new directors and new books that I wanted to read and new TV shows. And now we are in this age where there's so much to watch. There's TV shows, there's so many movies, and now after the pandemic, they're out for 2 weeks, and you can, if you want to buy them or rent them, you can have a movie that was just out 2 weeks ago and watch it at your house. But because I never thought that I would become this person, but because I don't have the time, I find myself falling back more towards the things I grew up with. You were talking about your latest episode is on Saturday Night Live, which I will be listening to. I haven't listened to it yet. Right now,
okay.
It
just came out like 12 hours ago. It's still Monday. It's still Monday as we're recording this, so we're good.
I only listened to 4 or 5 podcasts today. I couldn't get to that one yet. I promise tomorrow.
It's all good.
But I have been. I've been watching. I bought the new box set that just came out because of SNL's 50th anniversary. They released the first 5 seasons, so I've been watching. I've been working my way through the first season. And that instead of the Oscars were just on last week, and I've seen maybe 2 of the movies that were up for Best Picture, and in my head, I really should be seeing. There was a time I used to see all these movies, and I knew every movie that was up for Best Picture, but I think I turned it off. I was just watching Who Won on my phone while I went downstairs to watch a couple episodes of SNL from 1975.
You made the better choice.
Yes. So
again, to keep with the Indiana Jones references, you chose wisely.
But there's always that push and pull between. I love to relive the things that I grew up with, and it makes me happy. It makes me think of a time where I had less to worry about in the world and just personally. But I still want to discover new things. As we talked about earlier, it feels different. You're still searching for that feeling the first time you saw Star Wars. You're still searching for that feeling. And this is even from 2008 when I was in my late 30s of seeing The Dark Knight for the first time and just turning to my brother who was sitting next to me and kind of elbowing him like, oh my God, we're watching something that's really, really good right now.
Right.
And you're always, I think when you're into the kind of stuff that we're all into, you're always searching for that next hit of just to feel how that felt when you were a kid, to discover something new. And especially when you get in on it on the ground floor, to know that, I have all this ahead of me.
Right.
But sometimes it's also fun to find it later. I became a fan of Bob Dylan later in life, so it was fun to be like, okay, I have all these albums that I can discover and listen to because I haven't heard them yet. You're just always chasing after that hit of discovery.
Well, good news, because now you get to go pull out your Game Boy and you get to play all these great new games that we just told you about.
First, I have to go buy a Game Boy because I could not tell you where my
those
Game
are.
Boy...
I have them. I live in a very deep red part of Florida. I have Game Boys stashed around my house the way most people have handguns stashed. I've got one under the pillow. I've got one hidden in a cereal box.
I'd rather live near you than the people who have the
handguns. He has one in a plastic bag in the tank of the toilet. No, but I think, and what's interesting now. We have an episode coming up soon with Godzilla, and our guest there, Bill Susui, said that now's it's never been a better time to be a Godzilla fan because you got Godzilla, MonsterVerse stuff from Legendary and Warner Bros. You got Toho making movies again, and the last 2 Godzilla movies Toho's made have been awesome. You have a lot of books coming out. You have a lot of anime, which I haven't been a big fan of the Godzilla anime, but you have all this different stuff coming out, right? It's kind of the same way with Pokemon. It's kind of the same way for like if you're a Marvel fan, if you're a comic books fan, you know, you're eating good, as the kids say. You know, if you're a Pokemon fan, you know, there's a lot of great things happening with Pokemon. And I know for me, 2016 pulled me back in. It scratched that niche. That scratched that itch. I found that, like, oh yeah, I remember what that was like. I remember being the kid. I remember like when these were the only Pokemon in existence. 150 Pokemon. You know, when we discovered that there was like a rare Pokemon, Mew, that you can only get through certain means, right? And it was a one extra Pokemon. It was like, oh my God, there's an extra Pokemon. Now there's over 1,000 Pokemon, right? You know, over the intervening 30 years. So it definitely was like, oh yeah, I remember what that was like. It brought me back to being a kid. You know, it brought me back to being like when the world was a little bit more fun, a little bit more better. You know, we didn't have 9/11 and all these different things that kind of just, you know, made the world really what it was. You're like, oh, the world's kind of crap, right? You know, this is what the Gen Xers were always talking about. I get it now.
Yeah, it was when we were just living in precedented times instead of unprecedented times. Those precedented times were great. It was nice and boring.
Well, it was 98. It was Fukuyama. It was the end of history, baby. It was, you know, it was all good, you know.
I was doom scrolling about the upcoming X-Men movie and the Phantom Menace. I wasn't doom scrolling about our current about the state of the country.
Right. The biggest one of the biggest debates online at the time was, oh, why are the X-Men wearing black latex instead of yellow latex? Like I miss those halcyon days. That is so quaint compared to now. Now we're arguing over, like, you know, human rights online, you know, and how fascist the government is or isn't. Take me back to 98 anytime.
A good analogy, and this is not mine, this is Mark Rosewater, the head designer for Magic the Gathering, says this, but it's applicable here. He says that Magic has, like, this crispy hash brown sort of effect to it, where the best part of a crispy hash brown is that, you know, crinkly brown outside part. Like, the middle part you need it, but it's like the exciting part is biting into that crispy brown outside. Yeah. Well, Magic and Pokemon both regrow their crispy brown outside, so you always have that with every new game. You always have that new sense of discovery, and whereas a lot of times a game like will lose that sort of sense of discovery, Pokemon is able to refresh it every time, and so you come to each new iteration with brand new eyes, and I think that's one of the cornerstones to its success, and that's a really rare quality to have.
Right. Well, and in the last couple iterations of the game, they've embraced open world concept. Major
changes, yeah.
Oh, right. You know, there's a game that came out, was it 2-3 years ago now? It was called Pokemon Legends Arceus, and now there's another Pokemon Legend, which is kind of it's a mainline. It's kind of like a secondary mainline game, the Pokemon Legend series, which is going to be its own thing, and that more emphasis on like exploration and stuff like that. The first game was like that. The new one's coming out later this year. We don't know much about it, but it seems to be that same kind of exploration type of thing. Those type of games were like kind of like how I joke, like Andor and The Last Jedi are my kind of Star Wars. Like, I want that kind of more dark, gritty, you know, kind of a bummer 70s sci-fi. Like, I want more Empire Strikes Back, you know, in my Star Wars. I want that more of the bummer ending, you know, the cynical 70s sci-fi, you know, in it. Where Pokemon, you know, for me, I like that whole, like, I get to explore. I get to, you know, kind of like, you know, the Zelda games now are like open world, and you're just like, I wonder what on top of that mountain. I'm going to walk and climb up that mountain, you know. To me, that's a fun game. You know, I dated somebody when she turned me on to the new Legend of Zelda games, the Breath of the Wild, right? And she gets so mad because she was one of those type of play games of, okay, I'm setting a goal, I'm going to get that goal and accomplish that thing. Where me, I'm like with my controller, and she would like come into the room and she'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Exploring," you know. Just exploring, just meandering around Hyrule.
Yeah.
And you can do that now in the Pokemon games too. And for me, I can just not turn my brain off, but I can sit back and just explore. I'm like, I'm gonna go to that mountain, and whatever's on that mountain, I'll find out what's on that mountain when I get to that mountain. that's my like a good way to like kill an afternoon when you know, or to relax or just chill out or whatever, you know.
So I did bring a game. I brought a pop quiz game, Mike. I thought this would be fun. You admittedly know nothing about the Pokemon franchise.
Yes.
I want
Oh,
to.
boy.
I feel like now I know everything about the Pokemon franchise.
We're gonna put you to the
Oh,
test.
we're
I
at
am
the
not
tip
gonna
of
know
the
anything.
we're at the tip of the iceberg, right?
So can you all see this?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
You can
Why
bring
is
us back, and we could get more granular, more in the weeds. We only told you the first 2-3 games. We can.
Is it
we can
showing
get
you
into weird-
the whole title?
Yeah,
Or-
the game, the gotta guess them all.
Yeah. All right. So
Yes.
what I did is I assembled 10 first generation Pokemon. Their
Real fast,
names. Okay.
Now this is going to set the bar for future guests. You need to bring games on. You need
We
to step up-
try to do
you
games
need
on our
to-
show.
You need
We
to step up the game and bring a little bit more to the table than just knowledge and the jokes. You got to bring games.
we thought we were going to do games all the time. I think we've done 2 or 3. So that's something that we've really wanted to step up. But on our first away game, we decided to, bring the heat. So I've assembled 10, and I think this kind of goes from easiest to hardest. But I am going to, let me try it again. I have 10 Generation 1 Pokemon, and you are going to have to guess. Okay, there it goes.
Goodness.
You're going to have to
I need
guess.
to get my son from upstairs in bed and hide him off camera.
No, there's no phone a friend.
Yeah. There's no fear in this dojo. So I
Now
want
you're
so
sensei.
so since this is an audio only medium, and I brought literally just 10 pictures with me, I'm gonna have you briefly describe what you see, and then tell me what you think the name is.
Okay.
And this goes from easiest to hardest. The first couple you may have encountered in broader popular culture, and I'm genuinely curious what you think the last one is called.
So play along at home, everybody,
yes.
as I badly describe these coming up.
And then Ryan will provide the correct answers.
Oh, I'm involved now.
Nah.
All right, so who's
Well,
this?
I of course know who this is. This little yellow. Is it he? I would assume it's a.
Well,
is it
they're
it's an
animals,
it.
so there's male and female. This particular one is a male.
Okay, it's a male.
Yes.
Very cute, yellow, with red cheeks. It is. It's Pikachu.
There you go. Ding, ding, ding.
Yes, the female Pikachu would have a heart shape on her tail instead of a lightning bolt shape on her tail.
Yeah.
This is an orange dragon. I actually have an ornament of this on one of my Christmas trees. But it doesn't mean I'm going to know the name. It was we bought it for my son when he was about 10 years ago. Is it Charizard?
Charizard, you got it.
Charizard.
See, you're
Hey,
you're
look at
crushing
it,
it, man.
2.
I was about to give you a hint. I'm like, I've mentioned it a couple
Yeah,
of times.
we've name dropped a few of these. So
Yeah.
if you've been paying
And I
attention,
had no idea we were doing a game. So that was just Ross and I being on the same wavelength because we've been friends for.
Oh, I knew we were doing a game. I just didn't. Much like
decades.
high school and college, I just didn't study.
Yeah. Man.
I have seen it's a little cute, little cute pink ball, but I will not know the name. And when you say it, I'm going to know it, but I'm not. I don't know.
so this appears in a lot of the Super Smash Brothers games.
Yes. Yes.
So-
And
still doesn't
just
help.
describe what is it? What is it doing
It's
right now?
singing. It's singing.
Okay. So
So at
this,
home, you're probably screaming right now. As
Yeah,
you're
they're
listening to
screaming-
this on your
they're
iPhone,
screaming
like,
at
you
it, yeah.
idiot! How do
Yeah.
you not know who this is? That's what they
This
usually
is-
scream when they listen to my
yeah.
podcast. But
this is Jigglypuff.
now and it's funny that you're saying it. Oh, of course it is. I've heard my kids
Yeah.
talk about this.
Yes.
I should know this. It almost looks like a
You should.
dinosaur. It's a little green dinosaur-looking looking Pokemon with. It almost looks like an onion on its back, but I don't know the name of it. Who is it?
This is Bulbasaur.
This is my best friend. Yeah.
I of course have heard these names before. I just
Mm-hmm.
And there's one name I know that I know it's going to come up, and I'm not going to know that it's this character. Go ahead. I'll bring it up. It's a little scary looking. It almost looks like what would happen if the alien from Alien had a child with a unicorn or something like that. It's a white and purple looking. It's not humanoid, but it has 2 legs and arms. I definitely don't know who it is. I definitely do not know the name of this character.
All right, so this is Mewtwo. When I mentioned earlier that you have to go and capture a genetically modified Super Pokemon, this is the genetically modified Super Pokemon at the end of the game. There's also the Pokemon that the first Pokemon movie is based upon, which we didn't even talk about the movies, which that's a whole other... I mean, we could be here for a whole another hour just talking about the movies.
You're going to have to invite us back.
Was. Yeah, I was going to say, don't give away future episodes. Come on, guys. This looks like me on a Sunday in the summer if I actually don't have anything to do, which means it's this very large Pokemon lying down in in beautiful green grass. It almost looks like a bear. It's would that be the color blue? It's kind of a bluish.
Yeah, it's like a
color.
blue or a gray.
Yeah.
Like kind of depends on the you see both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know who it is.
This Pokemon is Snorlax.
I've heard that name before too. I should have
Yes.
realized that because it looks like Snorlax looks like he's having a very good dream as he's sleeping on his back.
He's actually based on, I'm blanking on the name now, but there is a game creator, one of the original game creators with Game Freak, who he was like a chubby guy and liked to eat, and he designed a Pokemon kind of based around himself, which is Snorlax, who actually in the original games also, there's 2 different points in the game where there's a Snorlax blocking your path. You can't get around them, and you have to, and it's to, because of the linear point of the story, it's to divert you away from that, and you have to go around them. But yeah, Snorlax is a very once known as an impediment to the game player. Now he's up there with like one of like the fan favorite top 10 type of Pokemon.
Yeah, I think Snorlax would be my spirit animal. Very much.
Yeah, he's mine too.
I have no idea. It looks like a discarded concept for the Noid from back in the day. It's this little pointy, purplish gray, evil looking. Well, it's an evil smile looking character.
Mischievous.
Yeah, it doesn't look evil. It's more of a mischievous type of smile.
He's up to no good, but he's enjoying it.
Okay.
This is Gengar.
Now that I've never heard of that character. I'm just some of these when you're saying like Snorlax, I'm like, okay, I've heard of that. I haven't heard of this character.
You know how some people they're like, oh, Nightmare Before Christmas is my favorite Disney movie, or like, oh, I like the Disney villains more than the heroes. Those people, Gengar is their favorite Pokemon.
Okay.
Right.
So this is one of the 3 ghost Pokemon from the original run of games, and this is one of the ones you could only get by using the link cable.
Yep.
So the people who were hanging out in Spencer Gifts back in 1999, they were loving Gengar.
Yes.
Anyone who had that first Evanescence CD Fallen on constant repeat like me was a huge Gengar head.
Yeah. Yeah, kids who are really into Invader Zim and
yes, very Zim coded.
Big. Yeah.
So this with this it's a very Pikachu looking character.
Good eye, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But with
very clever.
more stylized ears. So would this be the female Pikachu? Or is this...
No.
No? Yeah, because there's no heart, correct?
I'm realizing we have not talked at all about evolution. So
no, we haven't.
Okay.
We're terrible at this. So
there's going to be...
we're smarter than this.
Wait a minute, we're smarter than this.
So one of the draws of the game is that, you get your Pokemon that you acquire through your adventures, and as they get stronger, they evolve into, like, different forms of themselves. So like Charizard that we saw is the final evolution of a tiny little salamander named Charmander.
Okay.
And so what we're looking at
Charmander.
is the evolution of Pikachu. And that is called...
Raichu.
I've heard of Raichu also.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So, but not nearly as well known as Pikachu.
Now, Ross could have thrown you a curveball here because Raichu, and we didn't even get into like regional forms. That's a whole other animal, literally. In later generations, they started introducing what they call regional forms or regional variants. So, like, in this climate, this environment, Raichu looks like it evolved differently. It's basically they're basically starting to get into like speciesization that you see in the real world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a chance for
getting
them to go.
sweaty. This is like talking about like trigonometry. I'm getting very nervous now.
So, so they started like doing redesigns of older Pokemon, and like and like in the original game, it lived in like the desert, but now it lives in the snow. So now it's so they can like update some designs, do some different. And so Raichu actually has a regional form from the Alola region, which it kind of, because it's based on Hawaii, the Alola region, its tail becomes a surfboard and kind of like surfs on its tail. If I was doing this, I'd be like, it's Gen 1 Pokemon, but I would throw in like Alola Raichu just to like screw with people. But Ross is a lot nicer than I am.
I did spend a good 2 minutes waffling, but I decided, this is another one of my personal favorites.
I have seen this character before. I'm not going to know. Again, it's a character. It's purple and gray. It's a very dinosaur looking. I have seen this character before, but I do not know the name. It has a dinosaur tail. And kind of like not spiky, but like rocky kind of armor on its back.
It's funny that you say it's dinosaur-esque because it's actually this whole family they're actually based on rabbits. They're like poisonous rabbits.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, pixelated black and white games. You squint. Okay, yeah, it's a poisonous rabbit. Sure. This is. Use your imagination. This one is called Nidoking.
And this is...
See, I've seen this character, but I've never heard that name before.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an obscure one, I don't think they were necessarily fan favorites, but this is one of the ones where you find its earliest form very early in the game, and then, I picked one up, and I adventured with him, and, I just built a strong affinity for Nidoran, Nidorino, and Nidoking. And so I always, include him in my adventures.
Now you sound like Rob Schneider from Saturday Night Live.
All right, so this is what I thought would be the hardest one.
This is something when I dropped acid last night that I saw hovering over my bed. Oh, wait a minute. So this is a pink creature with a large tongue sticking out, a tail, little circles on the legs. This is not frightening, but this. If I was handing this, I would be talking about this as nightmare fuel later in my life. But it looks like something you would see on an acid trip. No, I don't know.
Meanwhile, I see just a cuddly little guy. He's just a cuddly little guy. This Pokemon's called Lickin' Tongue.
Look, they can't all be winners.
They kind of hit that one with the nose there. I think that was a late night one night. Like it's like Lickin' Tongue. That's fine. Let's call it a day on this one.
It gets an evolution later on in a later game that's called Lick Licky. So it all can't be. I
am a little disappointed because when my kids were more into Pokemon, and if it would have came up on the screen, I wouldn't have known what it looked like. But Dedenne, I always told them was my favorite. Whenever anybody brings up Pokemon, I'm like, oh yeah, Dedenne, but I would have had no idea if you would have had that on the screen. I wouldn't have remembered what it looked like.
Dedenne is actually a very obscure, very
okay,
that's a very deep cut. So when people ask you what your favorite Pokemon is, you say Dedenne. That's actually like people are like, oh, this guy Pokemon's right, So.
That's now I know how to impress people. If they're talking about Pokemon. I'm like, I'm gonna pull the Dedenne out of my back pocket. I've been waiting for this for years, and finally.
I'll even tell you this. It was originally released in the X and Y games. It's from the Kalos region, which is based on France. So
Okay.
So you can break that out like, oh, my favorite Pokemon is Dedenne from Kalos, and people are like, oh, this guy really Pokemon.
I will be overseas this summer, so I might have to break that. I might have to break that out.
It's only Dedenne if it comes from the Kalos region. Otherwise, it's just sparkling rat.
That was the name of the acid that I dropped last night.
Sparkling rat. I think I knew a girl who nickname. Never mind. In college.
Well, gentlemen, I will be honest with you. Coming into this, I was excited because of your excitement to talk about this, especially with having no prior knowledge of it. But now, after this discussion, I don't know if I would start playing the games, but I would definitely, if I was on Kindle and looking for something to read and something came up that said the history of Pokemon, the development of Pokemon, after this, I would buy that and read that because we've only scratched the surface and we've been talking for almost 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Give me time.
So,
this is a book I want to write, so give me time.
Okay, so I will wait until that is on Kindle, and then I will buy your book then.
What's interesting, we didn't even mention Pokemon manga, which I know Ross doesn't have much familiarity with. I've read the mangas. The mangas are a lot darker. They're a lot like Pokemon. In the games, Pokemon faint. No one dies. They just faint. They run out of energy. They faint. No, in the mangas, Pokemon die. Like Pokemon get ripped in half and people get crucified. It is wild.
Shit gets real, basically.
Yeah. Real quick too. Like people like the evil characters in the game are evil in the manga. It's a trip. Yeah.
Well, I would love to have you guys back to talk more about it. Because to be totally truthful, I would like to learn more about it and just you can be a pop culture phenomenon for a couple years and you can either fade into obscurity or you can fade back into the culture, but you're always there. And what you guys have been talking about, Pokemon as a franchise is something that is always evolving, and it's offshoots. You can have the kid-friendly games. You can have more adult kind of stuff for
tranched audiences.
As we were joking around about you grow out of this stuff. Well, maybe you thought you did, but when you're brought back in because of that nostalgia, then there's something else for you there that okay, maybe I don't want to always be in that kid world that I'm trying to get back to, but there's something like Star Wars. You can like the original ones, but you can also say, you know what, I want something a little bit dirtier, grimier. I want to watch Andor. So with Pokemon, if that's your sensibility, then they have something for you. So yeah, I think this will be part one of a multi-part series that we'll be getting back to. And I do want to thank you guys for being excited to come on and talk about it, because I was excited to talk about it just from your excitement, saying that you're getting ready for it. So I really appreciate that you guys came on and tell everybody where they can find you and about the podcast.
Yeah, so we're the History on Film podcast. We're on all the platforms. I always hate saying that because we're on all the ones that we know of, but if there's some crazy one, that people use, we're on Pandora. Like, I think I'm the last person that uses Pandora, but we're everywhere.
We're on what I call the big four platforms. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and Pandora, which is kind of. If there's any other podcast platform from there, I am not.
Yeah, you tell us, and we'll show up there.
Yeah.
But we're the History on Film podcast. It's not just movie. I always tell people, like, there's a ton of movie podcasts. There's a ton of film and Hollywood history podcasts. This is a show where we use film as a historical artifact to talk about history. We have some sort of methodology episodes. Ryan and I are both trained with historical backgrounds. So we do kind of get into the weeds in a lot of stuff in a lot of ways that other podcasts don't. So that's sort of our lane. But we do TV. We've done a couple episodes on video games. We really run the gamut.
We've done one on commercials. We've talked about commercials.
Yeah, we talk about commercials. Yeah. We did a Super Bowl episode where we correctly predicted. Well, I correctly predicted the game. So although I didn't have what's your guys' cornerback? I didn't. Yeah, Najee. I didn't have the pick six, but you know, I did call it for your bird. So that's probably why we were invited on. But
Exactly.
you know, but so we run the gamut, and our focus is really just help, you know, like sort of engaging with history, bringing on historians, bringing on, you know, scholars and creators, all kinds of people, and just, you know, it's an educational show, but we have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I was going to say. If you want to get into a deep dive on a lot of these subjects, it is a fun podcast. As I said in the beginning, you guys are probably the most learned people that I will talk to. You know what you're talking about. That's what you wish for when you're growing up, that learning can be fun. I listened to a bunch of your episodes about anime. That is something that I'm not that into. But much like this conversation that we had after listening to it, I said, you know what? Now that I know this, I'd like to check that out. I'd like to learn more about it.
We got when we and see, and that's also why on our show we do, you know, we joked in the first couple episodes like, oh, we give book and film recommendations because like, oh, who doesn't want homework after listening to a podcast? But we do those film or TV or those book, or even sometimes we have some upcoming episodes where like we actually plug an article. We couldn't really find a book, but we found some really good articles that's still good scholarship or good, you know, journalism on the topic to let people like, hey, because this could be a launching off point for you where we tell you to go watch XYZ or read XYZ, but now you do that, you get into the rabbit hole and you start exploring other authors or other journalists or other academics or other filmmakers or whatever based on our recommendation, and you get to go off and do your, you know, own thing. So that's why we do that recommendation, because we want people to, like you said, oh, I don't know anything about anime, but you listen to three guys that know a lot about anime, and we gave you suggestions, and those are our favorites, but they might not be yours, but you can at least go and watch Cowboy Bebop or Gundam Wing and see what the fuss is about, you know, and that's how we want people to kind of take the takeaway from our show is to, hey, I learned something, or I learned something new about a topic I didn't know about, or I got recommendations. I think one of the biggest endorsements of the show I got, our Christmas episode Ross and I did, of just, you know, it kind of was the genesis of our office hours format. I mentioned a book called The Gray Wolf, which is about these journalists that do the research, and they pretty sure that Hitler escaped Germany, and they kind of use like, well, we know Eichmann and other people did, so, you know, just the logical conclusion. Ross's grandmother, who I've known for years, I adore her. She's like my adopted grandma. Both my grandmas are dead, so I might as well get a new one anyway. I'm in the market, and you know, she sent Ross a message to tell me, hey, Ryan mentioned that book. I went to the library and got it. I'm enjoying it. That's, to me, that's the biggest endorsement. If I can mention some book that is weird history that I'm into, and mention like, hey, I'm reading this book for fun, and then someone else says, hey, I want to read that book, I've done something good in the world, I think.
The History on Film podcast. You're going to be entertained. You're going to learn something. You're going to have fun.
And it's every Monday, first thing in the morning, right in time for your drive to work, and it's free. Yep. It's no ads. No company wants to be affiliated with us. So.
Not yet. I mean, we'll see. Not yet. I'm going to one day say I knew them when. Mm-hmm. As you look down on all of us little people.
I mean, like I said, I'll sell out. I'll cash that BetterHelp check any day of the week. But so far, we haven't gotten any offers. So, you know,
I kept hearing they need a Joe Rogan of the left, and I'm like, you know, we're right here. So
yeah.
Well, Ryan, Ross, I want to thank you guys again. I had a great time.
Thank you so much.
Honestly, for me, I mean, this was fun. Just getting to learn something about something that I've always been aware of, but to get to do a deep dive into it with people who are obviously passionate about it, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, is just to hear about people's passions and hear about the stuff that people grew up with.
Let me leave you with this. So, you know, the worst person in the world generally is the person who says, let me tell you all about my fantasy football team. All of those people began like Ryan and I, let me tell you about my Pokemon team. And so that archetype does not exist until you have I have Rapidash on my team. I have Sandslash on my team. I've got Alakazam. Let me tell you all about it. Oh, and I was fighting against Bruno, and he did this, and I did this. All those people are now telling you, oh, I drafted, Christian McCaffrey in the first round. Oh, I got DK Metcalf in the 6th round. So, you're welcome, we're sorry.
Well, I'm going to have you guys back on. We have only scratched the surface, and there's a lot more interesting conversations to be had. As for this podcast, I keep saying to everyone, please review. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify. I'm sure I'm on Amazon. And whenever I look at the stats, we're not on YouTube because I hate putting stuff on YouTube for some reason. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify. We're on all respectable podcast platforms. Please give us a 5-star review. Get the algorithm out there so more people will listen. Our next episode, we are going to be covering, we go from one 90s phenomenon in Pokemon to another 90s phenomenon. We're going to be covering 90s grunge music.
Ooh.
Nice. As a guest, Mr. Guy Milks, who a lot of people know from a million different podcasts. That will be fun, talking to him. Just 2 old guys talking about rock music. I've become my dad. I can't believe it.
Now, is that one going to be formal attire, or is it come as you are?
I have to go dig out my old flannels upstairs. I'll rip some jeans and make them into shorts.
Personally, I'd go formal, full Canadian tuxedo, but that's me.
What did they say when the chicken crossed the road?
What?
Yeah, here comes the rooster.
Nice. I expect you guys to be listening. I also expect reviews and shares.
Yes, you're gonna have to cut our mics because we're just gonna keep going.
No, man, it's okay.
Yeah,
But,
if Ross and I were a vaudeville show, they would have got, we're the kind of guys the hook was made for.
And you'll just evolve into Statler and Waldorf eventually up in the balcony.
There we go.
That's a future episode also in about 2 or 3 months. So that'll be a good one also.
Awesome.
But, look for me on Bluesky on Twitter. I will not call it the other name because I won't.
Yeah.
Under this lightsaber kills fascists. Or Mick Jamison. It's both names on Bluesky and Twitter. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I had a great time. I want to thank you guys again. Go check out the History on Film podcast, and I will talk to you all soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.